All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's limited level ups. I'm recording this episode at about the 2 week mark of Final Fantasy Limited being out. And if you've been around the block, if you've played Limited for a while, you'll probably have picked up the sense that at this 2 week mark, especially on Arena, is where the format gets a little bit harder, right? This is something very typical for every format. The format shifts a little bit, not like gigantic meta shifts or anything, but it's to the point where, you're not getting the good cards for free all the time. A lot of the players that only draft once or twice per format, they've done their drafts. They're not in the queues anymore. You're drafting with more experienced players. And so it just gets a little bit tougher. And so the strategies that you might have been winning with for the first week don't always pan out. And so for today's episode, I really just want to focus on tips for continued success in the format, especially for those who aren't winning as much as they'd like to at this point. Want to highlight some factors that might be going into that, some things that you can do to maybe improve that win rate. Before we get into that, I have a birthday shout out to Don from his fiance Katie. So Katie reached out to me and asked if a shout out on the show could be part of Don's birthday present. And I said, absolutely, that'd be awesome. So happy 30th birthday to Don from Katie. And Katie also says that she officially approves of your magic obsession. Love to hear that. Happy birthday once again to Don. And let's get into our top 5 tips for success in Final Fantasy. So I want to start here just touching on how I'm seeing the format today. I jump into a draft today. What are my thoughts before I open a pack? And last week on the State of the Format Address episode, I mentioned that I thought that this format was just incredibly balanced, right? That's really one of the selling points of it. A very balanced format where all the decks are pretty close in power level. And I still think that is true. I still think that is mostly true. Although one of the things I said on that episode was that before I open my pack, I'm not really hoping to be in any color or any kind of archetype. I think that has since changed. After playing a bunch, I've really felt that blue is the best color by a good notch. Like, it's not leaps and bounds better than white and black and green. But if I were to go into a draft and hope that a color is open and hope that other people on my table don't want a particular color, I do think that would be blue. Blue just kind of does it all, right? It's got good creatures, it's got good interaction, it's got good card draw, it's very deep. I think a table can support maybe 4 blue drafters. And so I will make some concessions to that, right? I will pick a slightly worse blue card over a slightly better black or green card sometimes. And blue being good isn't groundbreaking news or anything. If you're playing a decent amount, you've probably felt the same thing. Even last week when I was talking about the things I liked about each color in this format, I spent a very long time talking about blue's cards, just waxing poetic about them. And at the time, I hadn't quite distinguished if that was just I like the blue cards or they actually are a little bit better. And yeah, now I think I can confidently say they are a little bit better. So now, with blue being the best color, the question becomes, how soft forceable is it, right? How much can you just jump into a draft and say, well, I'm just going to draft blue, it's the best color, it's very deep. What can go wrong if I just start taking blue cards early, even over better black, white, green cards, and just go for it, right? And I think last week, that was very doable. A lot of my early drafts, they just were like that. I was kind of soft forcing blue, ending up with a lot of blue cards in my table. I think now, though, now that we're at that 2 week mark, it's not as doable. Sometimes what happens on Arena is that the player base doesn't adjust to blue cards being as good as they are. This is a phenomenon that happens almost exclusively with blue cards. But sometimes that happens, right? And you just end up in a spot where it's like, well, I'm just going to draft blue all format because I'm getting these awesome cards, 9th pick or whatever. I don't think that's the case. I think people have picked up on the fact that blue is very good, and it's not just free all the time. That said, I still do jump into drafts hoping to be blue. So I start blue, and one thing, kind of like a soft skill in the format right now I think is important to have, is just clocking how open blue is, right? So that includes density of the color once you get to pick 6, 7, 8, right? How many blue cards are still in the pack? This includes, does Ice Magic make it to you 8th, 9th pick? Does Dreams of Laguna wheel sometimes? Because, on average, I think that blue is not as free as it was, but you're still going to run into tables where you can just identify, oh, hey, like nobody else is doing this, or maybe 1 or 2 other people are dipping into blue. You get a 7th pick Dragoon's Wyvern, and when that happens, when I get a density of good blue cards in the middle of pack 1, and some really, really good commons or uncommons slip through the cracks, that's when I start to maybe put the blinders on a little bit and just go, okay, I can pretty much predict that I'm going to get good blue cards in the future. I think you have to be careful about this because I do think if you are too ambitious about this and go, okay, well, I see one Dragoon's Wyvern, 7th pick, that means blue has to be open. That might have been a card that just slipped through the cracks and it wasn't actually indicative of blue being super open, but it's the continued like pack after pack after pack. I'm seeing the signs that blue is open. That's when I can have some confidence. So just for you out there, number one, if you are somebody who, like me, who's been drafting blue a lot, I would, once again, kind of train that skill, that soft skill of just every single pack of the first pack, kind of clocking what everybody else at the table might be doing, reading into, is this a soft table where blue is just going to be really open, or do I have to fight for it? Sometimes still worth fighting for, right? Just kind of take in what cards you have early and say, hey, it's still worth fighting for this color, even if it's not that open. But for those people that aren't drafting blue at the rate that I am currently, I would start taking blue cards just a lot higher. Like I said, it just kind of does it all. It's a nice contained package. You don't even really care that much what you pair it with. Like blue white, blue black, blue red, blue green, like all these are good decks. They're all good decks. I guess the caveat being blue green is more of a multicolor deck. Point stands though, blue is very powerful and it pairs well with every color. My second favorite color in the format currently is white. Just that nice white artifact aggro package you get with like Magitech Infantry and white Auracite and Gala Cat, White Mage's Staff, all those kind of cards. And not necessarily blue-white artifacts, by the way. I think that the white artifact package kind of is self-contained. Very much just a white thing if you want it to be. In fact, most of the time, I'm aiming for my white aggro decks to be as white as possible. I think that if you're like split down the middle with some, black attrition-y cards or green ramp multicolor cards, like those cards don't really play as well with the white cards. You can get some blue cards in there because the blue cards tend to be generically good. You put a Dragoon's Wyvern in and some Ice Magics and, some interactions, some good threats. That's totally fine. Red, of course, also pairs fairly well with the white cards with the red-white deck. But most of the time, I'm just thinking of this as a white deck, a core white deck. And again, I think it's very good. I actually hadn't been drafting too much white until the last few days. Reason being that I've been drafting a lot of blue-based decks that often transition into like blue-black or blue-green or blue-red. And those tend to be slower decks, right? Like, the blue-based control decks that are drawing a bunch of cards, or green multicolor or black attrition. And the white cards don't add that much to those kind of decks, right? Like white aggro, I think, is the one true good aggro deck in the format. So it tends to be difficult to actually pivot into this deck, and also sort of difficult to pivot out of it if you start in a white aggro deck. So it's kind of on its own on this island of being very good, very strong, but I think what you're really aiming for with these white aggro decks is as many white cards as possible. Because I think if you add too many black cards, too many green cards, it kind of just dilutes the good artifact aggro plan. This isn't to say that I'm not happy playing, a Sephiroth's Intervention or a Vane's Treachery, some black removal, or some really strong green cards, or some really strong red cards. Again, red is probably the most common color I pair with white. It's just to say that you don't want too much of that stuff, because I think what the other colors do well isn't necessarily attack, aggro. A lot of the strengths in black, green, and blue lie elsewhere, right? So yeah, that'd be my tip for white decks, is just try to build them as streamlined one color as possible, lightly touching the other colors. I also quickly want to call out the card Weapons Vendor. This is the 4-mana 2/2 in white that when it enters, you draw a card, and you can have an equip for only 1 mana on each of your combats. Just wanted to give a quick word of caution about this one, because I've seen a lot of 4-mana 2/2 weapons vendors that are just 4-mana 2/2 draw a card, right? They're not really using the equipment part of this card very well. They just kind of just sit there. And I think it's a deck building thing, right? You really just want to make sure you have, I'd say, 5 equipment in your deck before you play Weapons Vendor. I don't prioritize this card highly at all, by the way. Like, I'll take one, but I don't think it's super important to these white aggro decks. It's a card that once I've got the equipment, I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll play it. That's totally fine. But I don't take this card early, even when I'm going down the white aggro path, because I might not end up with enough equipment to justify it. So just to call out there, you might be losing some percentage points if you're playing Weapons Vendor without that number of artifacts, because I've seen that a lot. Like, think about it this way. If you play this card on turn 4, you're playing a white aggro deck, and you play this on turn 4, and you don't have an equipment on the battlefield to use the ability next turn, it's an absolute disaster. Like, this is not what you want to be playing on turn 4. Your opponents are very happy if that happens. I think you're looking for like bare minimum 3 equipment in your deck to be happy with Weapons Vendor, and that's like bare minimum. I could see playing it on 2 if you like really needed the playable, but otherwise I would just look somewhere else. In the same vein, Gallicat is a card that I think you really want to be conscious about how many artifacts you actually have in your deck when you're playing this. So this is the 2 and a white 1/3 Vigilant Flyer that gets +2/+0 as long as you have 2 or more artifacts. I have seen a lot of 1/3 Gallicats on the other side of the battlefield, and heck, I've been guilty of this myself. I've had Gallicat in my deck with 6, 7 artifacts. I really think you want to get to like the 11, 12 range. And to get to that range, I've been fine playing something like Monk's Fist, right? The 2 mana drop select equipment. The equipped creature gets +1/+0. The equip cost is 2. Not a phenomenal card by any means, but this gets the job done. Fills out the 2-drop slot, gives you another equipment. So yeah, I would just say don't be afraid to play a Monk's Fist or 2 to make sure your Gallicats are actually functional. I don't have too much to say about black. I think black is fairly straightforward. The removal spells are good. Some of the creatures are pretty solid. Like, nothing too funky going on with black. I play black a decent amount. Paired with green, paired with blue, it's all pretty good. The one card, I guess, that I do have a few more words on is Cornered by Black Mages. This is the 1 black sorcery. Target opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. You make a 0/1 pinging wizard. And I talked up this card last week and why it's good, and I still think it is very, very good. I just want to give a few more thoughts on it. So, a lot of the pushback against this card being good is, okay, well, my opponent sacks a token, and that's pretty bad for me, right? Usually with an edict effect, you really want to set it up somehow so that you can kill one of their bigger creatures. You don't feel that great if they sack a token, like not a full card's worth of value. And the way I framed it last week is, well, that's still good for you. Like, even if they just sack their worst thing, a token, and you get this 0/1 pinging mage that you can sacrifice, you can get some pings out of, you can chump block with, right? That's still not that bad. The fail case on this card is not that bad. Another way to kind of wrap your head around this is that them sacking a token is often a bigger cost than it might seem, because they had plans for that token, right? They wanted to chump block with it, or they wanted to suit it up with an equipment, or they wanted to sacrifice it to Evane's Treachery. You also might not quite realize how brutal it is when you cast that, not being able to see your opponent's hand and not being able to see your opponent's plan. Because here's a situation that I ran into where my opponent cast Cornered, and it probably didn't look that good for them, but it was really pretty backbreaking for me. So it's my opponent's turn, and I've got a decent board, maybe 4 creatures. They've got I think 2 creatures, and I got them pretty low in life total. And I'm looking at my hand, and I have a combat trick and a removal spell. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I can set up lethal next turn. If I, end of turn, kill one of their blockers, even if they play a new creature this turn, that's totally fine. Kill one of their blockers, and then I can attack all and cast my pump spell for lethal, right? If they cast Cornered by Black Mages, I'm now down a 2/2, and they're up a chump blocker. And now my attack is no longer very good, because in that attack, maybe one of my creatures was about to get eaten. That wouldn't have mattered if I killed them, but I'm not going to kill them anymore. And that's the turn they stabilized, right? So it looks bad, right? Just killing a 2/2 doesn't seem that good. But it was really, really bad. I know I don't have to talk up this card too much to people that already are enjoyers of this card, but I do really want to talk it up to folks that aren't onto this card, because I do think it's really exceptional, really quite good, one of the best commons. I will warn that you do really want to have that black be castable on turn 3, right? If you're not a heavy black deck, it gets a lot worse. I also don't like this card in like a green-black deck, because green-black is all about going over the top, right? It's about drawing a bunch of cards and, filling your graveyard with things you might flash back and, casting big things. It doesn't really care that much about incremental value like a black attrition deck does, like a red-black deck or a white-black deck, even some blue-black decks. So I don't play this in black-green. I think it's like a low-tier playable there. It's just a different kind of game plan in black-green, right? But everywhere else, yeah, I'm very happy about it. Green has stayed fairly static for me compared to last week. I like the color. It's good at doing multicolor, big rampy things, just typical green things. I have some more thoughts on green when we get into one of our distinguished tips, so I'll talk about those when I get there. But yeah, green's good. I like green. I play green a decent amount. Then I want to touch on the worst color, which is red. And, I mentioned that it was the worst color last week. I still feel that to be true. I think it's a good support color. I just don't end up in heavy red decks all that often. There's not very many good red cards to fill out my deck with. So often it's like, I'm playing 6 or 7 pretty good red cards. And what draws me into red, it's pretty limited. There's not that many cards that make me want to take a red card early. a rare. Honestly, actually, not even that many rares. There's like Nibelheim of Flame, the Wrath, the 2 red. Target a creature, that thing deals damage equal to all creatures. You can flash it back and draw a bunch of cards. Yeah, that card's absurd. That card will definitely pull me into red. But aside from that, there's not that many good red rares. Really, what pulls me in are the 2 phenomenal red uncommons. You know, one of the things I can say about red is it gets some of the best uncommons in the set. Something, top 5, I would say. Choco Comet, which is X red, deals X damage, and you make a 2/2 bird. And Samurai's Katana, which is the 3/3 haste trample job select equipment. These cards are both phenomenal. Choco Comet, the better one, but not by a ton. I think it's very easy to underrate just how good Samurai's Katana is. This card is excellent. Choco goes in more decks because I'm happy to splash Choco in like a green multicolor deck, or be maybe like a green red based multicolor deck. Katana is much more for the aggro deck. You really want to cast that on turn 3. If you can't cast it on 3, you lose a lot of the value of what the card does, because a big part of this card is just going like on turn 3, hit you for 3. You don't get that block in most of the time. There's not many like 3/3s or 3/2s. A lot of cards are like 2/3s and 2/2s running around in this format. So that first initial hit on 3, kind of having enter the battlefield, deal 3, is a really big deal for this card. But it's a great card. It's a really, really strong card. Very happy to play this in my white decks. Also wanted to just touch real quick on 2 commons here, Suplex and Blazing Bomb. Closer in power than you might think. I think intuitively you would think Suplex, which is the 2 mana, deal 3 or exile target artifact, would be a better card. I found this card to be fairly clunky as far as deal 3s go. Like, the sorcery speed on this is a really big knock on it. It's nice that it can exile artifacts once in a while. That definitely comes up. Killing your opponent's white Auracite, that always feels very good. But I don't think you should take this card all that highly. It's not a card that should pull you into red. Let me put it that way. It's a card that I'm fine playing in red, but not one that I take very highly at all. And then Blazing Bomb is kind of the opposite. I mean, not that I get pulled into red because of Blazing Bomb. This is a card I'm continually impressed with. So Blazing Bomb, for those who don't know, is the single red mana 1/1. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, if at least 4 mana was spent on it, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can sacrifice this creature. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature. Activate that only as a sorcery. So yeah, this is just like a fine scaling threat that kills creatures, and pairs nicely with equipment because you can equip it. And then, sack it to deal a bunch of damage. There aren't many 1-drops in the format, so just having a way to spend mana on turn 1 is really nice. So yeah, I would just say as far as acclimating yourself to the format, just tune down the dial a little bit on how much you like Suplex and turn up a little bit on Blazing Bomb. And I think you'll find some pretty good results there. And a quick shout out to the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. You can go there if you're enjoying the show, feel like you've gotten something out of the show, and maybe you won a few more drafts. Really does help. Really appreciate everybody who supports there every week. If you want to check that out, bunch of rewards over there that we want to give back to you. Link in the description of the YouTube video and the podcast as well. Really appreciate that. If you want to support in a non-monetary way, a subscribe, a like, a comment, all that good stuff really helps. Let's get back to the show now. All right, let's get into our list now, shall we? So tip number 1 on our list is card draw and card filtering is really, really strong in this format, and I would say most people are probably not valuing it where they should, as far as where they take it in the draft and how willing they are to include multiple resentful revelations. For example, the 1 in the black, look at the top 3, take 1, rest in the grave. Multiple copies of that in their decks. So I'm going to touch on why these cards are so good in the format first before we get into the specific cards. Number 1, I think this is a format where almost every deck, aside from the most streamlined white aggro decks, just really want to be hitting their lands consistently, like land 4, land 5, land 6, land 7. I feel sometimes that if I hit my 5th land but miss my 6th, I start to fall behind my opponent, right? I'm playing like a blue-black deck. My opponent's playing some sort of green mid-rangey ramp deck, and if they can get up to 7 mana and start casting their giant creatures, I often have to spend my whole turn dealing with a threat rather than being able to go toe-to-toe with them, kill something, and then also add to my board. I found that mana advantage in just like having enough mana to cast your cards is really, really important in this format, especially because there's so much to do with your mana. And having these card filtering, card selection cards in your deck kind of feeds into itself very nicely, because the more of these kind of cards you have, the more you don't mind hitting your land drops. Because when you cast your combat tutorial, your draw 2, well, you draw and you'll find more action, right? Like the kind of intuition might be like, oh, if I keep hitting land drops, I'm not going to have as many spells. Well, having these card filtering and card draw spells, they self-solve for that. So yeah, lands are good, right? And I think that's something I would really just hammer home. I've done a lot of deck techs this week where people have maybe wanted to cut a land, or they're starting with 16 lands, and I'm just like, you really just want to play more lands. There are some green decks where you've got a lot of town greeters, for example. The 2-mana 1/1 mill 4 take a land. Like, the more town greeters they have, I'm going to be more likely to cut a land. But if you're on the fence, right? If you're on the fence about cutting a land or not, I would lean towards not, especially if you're splashing. So yeah, hitting your land drops is very important. But also, when you have cards like Dreams of Laguna and Resentful Revelation, like these cards that dig very deep, you get to piece your synergies together so much more often than an opponent who doesn't have this kind of stuff, right? And so you don't have to worry so much about like, well, I have to have the exact right balance of, things in column A and the exact right balance of things in column B. Like if you think of the black-red deck, right? The exact right balance of, how many wizards do I want? And how many spells, how many removal spells? If you just have a bunch of Resentful Revelations, and sometimes Laughing Mad, I'll even play Laughing Mad sometimes. That's the red one that you can discard a card and draw 2 cards. When you have a number of those, you just kind of find what you need. And so your deck is just more functional. And that leads into another point of just finding what you need. Not just as far as like what your deck does, but in game, right? So I had a blue-black deck the other day. I actually posted this on the channel, so if you want to go check this out. It was actually a Grixis deck, black, blue, red. And I had a lot of games where my back was really against the wall. I needed to find very specific cards. I needed to find Sephiroth's Intervention to kill a threat and gain 2 to survive. I needed to hit my land drop on turn 3, or else I just, lose to the opponent curving out on me. But because I was able to cast Resentful Revelation, I went like, okay, cast that, hit my land, play a 2-drop to block their 2-drop, and I didn't just die on the spot. So just so many situations where I'm like, I need a specific thing here. And having these cards just helps you find that specific thing more often. They're also great for just beating the natural variance of Limited, right? Like, you have natural variance in Limited Magic where you're going to draw too many lands sometimes. You're going to draw the wrong colors of lands. You're not going to draw enough action. And tools to beat that feels really good. Sometimes you can't afford to play too many tools that are variance busters, cards that are just like, okay, well, this is going to add more consistency. Things like cantrips, because sometimes they're just not good enough, right? The cards aren't strong enough in the format. But in this format, the cards that we get, Combat Tutorial and Resentful Revelation and Dreams of Laguna, these are very good rate cards, right? Like, what you're getting for the mana is good. It's very strong. And of course, these are all card advantage as well. So that's another layer on top of that. On this week's Lords of Limited, for folks who listen to that, Ben made a good point where he was saying in his early drafts of the format, he was just losing to variance, right? He's just like, I'm getting flooded and screwed and, whatever. And Amaz, who, if you don't know Amaz, really good Magic player, he was saying to Ben on Twitch, like, Ben, the reason you're getting screwed and flooded, even though you're putting mostly good cards in your deck, is you're not playing these blue cards and these card selection cards that help you beat the variance, right? So just being able to beat that variance is such a huge advantage over opponents who aren't going to have that advantage, right? So people who aren't playing as many Resentful Revelations and Dreams of Laguna and such. So yeah, Dreams of Laguna and Combat Tutorial, these ones, I think people are taking these cards relatively highly now. They've now adjusted. These used to be like cards that wheeled, but no longer. But even now, I think they might be taken a little bit later than they should, and also, I'm happy to play multiple copies of these. That's one of the things that I really realized I've been playing more and more. I want like 4 or 5 card draw spells in my blue decks, or in most of my decks, right? Any of my slower decks. 4 or 5 ways to see extra cards, to go up card advantage. I'm really happy about that. So yeah, Combat Tutorial, Dreams of Laguna, I think those are known quantities to a lot of players. But I would also group Resentful Revelation in there. The 1 in a black sorcery, look at the top 3. Put 1 in your hand, the rest in the grave, flashback for 7. This card is just as good. Not only is it card advantage, albeit, expensive, but it digs very deep. It puts multiple cards in the graveyard, so it plays very well with other flashback cards. Your black-green decks, for example, just really want cards in the graveyard, right? It wants to up the permanent count in your graveyard. I've had decks where I've had 3 of these, right? That Grixis deck that I was talking about, I think I had 3 in that deck. Maybe it was 2, but in any case, I had quite a few. But on that video I posted, I had quite a few people in the comments being surprised that I wanted to play this many Revelations, right? I think people are looking at it as you need a reason to play Revelation, like you need to have a bunch of ways to get cards back from the graveyard, right? I don't think that's the case. I think that if you had literally no flashback, no other flashback, and didn't have like the green-black graveyard stuff, I'd still be happy playing a copy or two. But when you have that stuff, it's even better. Some other cards that are along the same line. So Circle of Power, I really like this one. This is the 4-mana black sorcery. You draw 2, you lose 2 life, you make a wizard token, and your wizards get +1/+0 and gain lifelink until end turn. Yeah, just really good. Not quite as good, I think, as the cards I just mentioned, the cheaper card draw, because part of what I really like about these cheap card draw spells is they can help you hit your land drops. This one doesn't do it as nicely, right? Because if you're missing land 3 or land 2, well, land 2, I guess not, but, missing land 3 or land 4, this one's not really going to help you, but still a powerful card. Travel the Overworld. This is another really, really great one. This is the 7-mana draw 4 and has affinity for towns. Like, when your town's opponent casts a travel for 3 mana, and they refill, and the game's kind of a little bit stalled out, and they draw 4 cards, like, you just have such a sinking feeling, right? So once again, it doesn't do the hit your land drops thing, but it does do the just outcard your opponent thing super, super well. There's also kind of a weird one, Commune with Beavers, the green mana sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You can reveal an artifact, creature, or land, put into your hand, the rest in the bottom. This one's a little bit different, and I don't play this as much as I played the other ones. Actually, I play this fairly sparingly. But I do like it when you have really strong cards in your deck. Basically, the more good rares or good uncommons you have, the more I want to see those a little more often, and the more I'm willing to play Commune with Beavers in my deck. Sometimes replacing a land, replace a non-forest basically in your deck. You can get away with that. But sometimes I'll play it as a spell too. Like if I just am very mana hungry, sometimes the best cards I'm looking for are like an Arden, right? The 8 mana black creature, or like a Bahamut or something, like a 9 mana card. I don't really want to cut a land for that, but I do want to see those cards more often. So same concept applies, right? Just finding the things you need. And yeah, I'm going to close with this tip here, but I really wanted to start on this because I think this is the number one thing, like if you're not doing, you're probably losing some percentage points in your drafts. Tip number 2, do not be afraid of Mill. Mill is your friend. Mill does good things. So this is another thing I kind of touched on last week with talking about Town Greeter, the 2 mana 1/1, mill 4, take a land from those, and if it's a town, you gain 2. Just noting that I've heard a lot of people being like, I feel so bad when I mill my bomb, and I maybe even miss on a land with this thing, and there's some feel bads involved with mill, basically. I get it. But one way to get over the feel bads of that is build your decks in ways where mill is actively good and something you're actively looking to do, to just have your deck tick, to find your important cards, to dump flashback cards in the graveyard. But a lot of times when I'm building decks in the green-black space, and this could be green-black plus blue, green-black plus red, green-black plus white doesn't really happen. But yeah, when you're like Jund or Sultai-ish, there's ways to build your deck where you're just like thrilled to draw Town Greeter. Or Shinra Reinforcements is another one. The 3 mana 2/3, mill 3, and gain 3 when it enters. This is a card, by the way, I like quite a bit. I think that it's not great on its own, but it's also not terrible. And in the decks, it's good in it. It's just phenomenal. And when you flip over multiple cards you care about, or fill your grave for your, your Cloud of Darkness or whatever, so that 5 mana 3/3 flyer can come in and kill like a 4 toughness creature. Like that just feels so, so good. And I can't remember any set where self-mill was so strong in recent years anyways. Like, you go way back 5 years or something, there's a few in there, but self-mill is just so, so good in this format for a lot of reasons. So let's get into it. So the obvious one, of course, flashback. We just talked about really wanting to play more lands, and when you have more lands, you'll have more mana to flashback your spells that you've dumped in the graveyard, cast those Resentful Revelations, those Dreams Lagunas, those Retrieve the Espers, all those kind of things. Just anytime you can build a deck where Town Greeter sometimes draws you 3 cards when you cast it, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. But then there's a bunch of uncommons that really want you to mill, right? So for example, Vanille, Cheerful to See. This is the green 3/2 that buys something back from the graveyard, mills 2 when it enters. Vanille's a phenomenal card, but one of the issues is you don't always want to run it out on turn 4, right? You kind of want to go, well, if I cast it and I flip over 2 lands, I'm not going to be that happy about it. Maybe even flip over 2 spells and it's like, I can't even get anything back. But if your turn 2 is a Town Greeter, or your turn 3 is a Shinra Reinforcements, you just get so much more selection on your vanilla, and you feel pretty good about it a lot of the time just casting it on turn 4. And, as we know, having cards stuck in your hand is not a good thing. So just having the confidence to cast your vanillas on turn 4 a little more often, really nice. But just, Black-Green's theme really wants this. And of course, when you're in a Black-Green deck, this makes the most sense. Stuff like X-Death, the 1 Black-Green 3/3, gain 3 when it enters, and when you have 6 or more permanents in your grave, it transforms into a X3 Trampler, where X is the number of permanents in your graveyard. Yeah, this is obvious, of course. And when you're black-green, you want to prioritize this card. But I guess one of my points I'm getting at here is that even when you're not black-green base, maybe you're a blue-black, it's really good there too. Any slower deck, there's a lot of ways to use the graveyard and be happy that you're milling. Some other cards. In red-black, we've got Garland, Knight of Cornelia. So this is the 2-mana 3/2 in black-red that whenever you cast a non-creature, you surveil one, and has the ability to cast it from your grave for 7 mana as a 5/5 flyer. Milling that is great. We've got a card that I think is very underrated. Maybe the most underrated card in the format right now, SideQuest Card Collection. I was talking about how the good blue cards don't wheel as often as they did last week, but I still get this card on the wheel, sometimes last pick. I think even just today I got it last pick. So this is the 4-mana blue enchantment that says you draw 3 and then discard 2. And at the beginning of your end step, if there are 8 or more cards in your graveyard, transform this enchantment, and it turns into a 4/4 flying vehicle crew 1. Well, since there are so many good mill cards in this set, so many good cards to put cards in the graveyard, your greeters, your reinforcements, your resentful revelations, I find that getting to 8 is so easy, even on the turn you cast it. And of course, we talked about how hitting your lands is good and card filtering is good, so this card plays into all of that. But if you think about this as a 4-mana 4/4 crew 1 vehicle that super loots, right? It draws 3 and discards 2. I think that's a good way to frame it. That's a very good card. If you had that card, you'd be very happy about it. And if you build your deck in a certain way with enough self-mill, it's pretty easy to have that card reach that level. So just, I'll call it there. There's also a bunch of rares that really want you to mill, right? So something like Esper Origins, which is the 2-mana green sorcery that surveils 2 and gains 2. But if you flash it back, it turns into a really good Saga creature. We've got Summon Titan, which is that one that mills 5 and then returns all lands back from your graveyard, and a creature gets gigantic based on the number of lands you control. Nibelheim of Flame, the aforementioned Nibelheim of Flame. That's the Wrath, the red Wrath that you can cast from your graveyard. So it's all of these cards that if you have them early, if you have an Esper Origins or a Nibelheim of Flame or a Summon Titan, I'm just like, yes, I'm going to take every Town Greeter, every Shinra Reinforcements, so I can see my rares a little more often and enable them a little more often. It's sort of like what I was just talking about where, if you've got these good rares, you want the card selection even more. Same thing goes with mill. If you can mill your Esper Origins or mill your Nibelheim of Flame, you're essentially drawing it, right? And even for a card like Summon Titan, which doesn't have flashback, there's ways to get your cards back from your graveyard, like vanilla, like we talked about. So just more selection, seeing those rares a little more often is a great thing. Another good thing I can say about building your decks in a way that have a lot of mill, a lot of ways to put cards in the grave, is you actually get to put some not so great cards or not so desirable cards in your deck and have them be good cards. There's the obvious ones that are pointed to green-black. Diamond Weapon, which is the 9-mana 8/8 reach that costs 1 less for each permanent in your grave. That's one where most decks don't really want this card, but you can make it a very, very good card. The Final Days, which is the 4-mana black sorcery, makes 2 zombies, and you can flash it back for 6 mana to make X zombies, where X is the number of creatures in your grave. So both these cards, yeah, you don't really want them in most decks that don't have mill. But when you enable them, they're really strong cards. And especially at this point in the format, where you're not just going to get a pile of generically good cards that don't need any work, and they're just going to be good, right? Your decks aren't going to be full of those very often. You need to do some work. You need to do some drafting to make the lesser cards a little bit better. Even something like Gasol Greens, right? The 2/2 bird token that you can flash back for 7 mana. Not a great card, but I'm fine putting this in my 2-drop slot. I'd even say I'm happy putting it in my 2-drop slot if I'm going to just mill it, draw it for free sometimes. A card like Evil Reawakened, which is the 5-mana reanimation spell, being able to cast this on turn 5 with consistency, sort of like the vanilla thing where you can cast it, you don't have to have it stuck in your hand. You can actually say, oh, this is a relevant card if you're playing multiple Town Greeters and reinforcements and all that kind of stuff. You also get some really undesirable cards that nobody really wants, and you get to make them pretty good cards. So one I've been playing a lot more of recently is Relentless XATM 092, which is the 6-mana artifact creature, 6/5, that has Super Menace. It can't be blocked by anything but 3 or more creatures, and you can return it from your graveyard for 8 mana to the battlefield with Finality counter. Kind of the same thing as Gasol Greens. If you need a top-end card, just like you might need a 2-drop, and if you say, I'm going to just draw this for free sometimes, right? It's going to be put in my grave for free sometimes, I'm happy to play it as a way to, have another high impact card in my deck. Shambling Seath, this is another one. This is the 3-mana 3/3. Comes in tapped. You can buy it back from your graveyard whenever you cast a non-creature by paying black. Same kind of thing. If I just mill this sometimes, great. Fang, Fearless L'Cie. Here's another one. This is the other side of the meld with Vanille. The 2/3 that says whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, you draw a card, lose a life. Another card that not many decks can use, but if you're heavy on the mill, heavy on the flashback, it's going to be a pretty good engine for you. And then I want to touch on Phyton just quickly. This is a more generic card that you see played here and there. This is the 3-mana instant in black. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. So where I really like playing this card is 2 main places. One, if you've just got some phenomenal cards to get back, your deck is very rare or uncommon heavy, and you go, hey, I would like to get back my good cards. That's a good place for it. But sort of like Vanille, sort of like Evil Reawakened, it has the problem of, well, you don't always really want to draw this in your opening hand. And you draw this on turn 4 when you need something impactful or something you can cast right away, and it doesn't even do anything at all sometimes. There's like no creatures in the grave or 1 creature in the grave. So it's kind of the same concept, where if you've got these mill cards, you turn Phyton, and many cards like it, from not so great cards that are awkward in your opening hand to really great cards, because this turns into a draw spell with a lot of selection if you're dumping the top 8 cards of your library into your graveyard at some point. So this whole tip is twofold. One, it's to say to the folks that are hesitant about milling, don't be so afraid. Don't worry about milling your good cards. Sometimes it happens, but your deck is random. It doesn't actually matter math-wise. And 2, for the folks that maybe aren't so afraid of it, but have been a little bit reluctant to be as mill heavy. I mean, if you don't have the payoffs, if you don't have the flashback cards, if you don't have all these cards I'm talking about, then sure, your Greeter, your 2-mana 1/1 mill for, is going to be fairly whatever. But if you can build and draft in a way to make these cards excellent, I think they do get there. I think they get to a point where they become excellent. A point where your deck is really cohesive and it feels like it's doing a thing rather than just like, oh yeah, like here are some black-green cards. My next tip is when you're drafting green, dream big. Because I think a lot of people are, kind of funny enough, a bit too reserved with their green decks. I find that green's strength in this format, above all else, is the ability to help you play multiple colors. And that's fairly standard fare for green. But when I do deck techs for green decks, I find they often fall a little bit too much into like the mid-range of green space, where you're not that good at killing early, and your late game might not be that amazing. You've got like a 6-drop and 2 7s maybe, or like 2 6s and a 7 or something. But, if those die, you're kind of just left with a bunch of fixing and ramp and, not a lot of impact, right? So basically, I think the tendency right now is to be a bit too conservative when I don't think you need to be. Between the lands, the town lands that sometimes, in some pods, people don't take them at all, or not very highly. And stuff like Town Greeter to help you hit your land drops. Stuff like Blitzball that I'll play sometimes when I'm very colorful. We've got Precious Wandering, the green ramp spell. We've got Torgal, the 2-mana 2/2 that taps add mana of any color. And there's a few more in there too. Summon Fenrir, right? The awesome uncommon saga that searches out a land. There's quite a bit of green fixing out there. And they're either cards that you want to take very early, so you're going to have them in your pile already. So like Torgal and Fenrir. And that already makes me go, okay, well, I can play multiple colors. Or the cards that go very late that you don't actually need to take highly and you can kind of get for free, like Blitzball, Precious Wandering, sometimes the town, stuff like that. And so, yeah, I guess this is a pretty simple tip, but I really thought of it because somebody in my Discord noted that they were watching just Lola draft. And Lola was just generally splashing more in his green decks than the person watching kind of expected you might want to. The idea really is that, if you're spending a bunch of time in the early game setting up your mana and ramping and putting cards in your deck that just fix colors, you really want to make sure that you never run out of high impact stuff to do, right? So I don't mind playing a few 6s and a 7. So, I'm talking like 5, 6, 7 mana cards that are impactful. I would play, something between like 6 to 7 of them sometimes, right? Just to make sure you've got quite a bit of good top end. Now, mind you, you have to make sure that your early game is good interaction and fixing and ramp and all that kind of stuff. But as long as you have that, you should be planning to say, like, once I've set up, I'm just going to slam threat after threat after threat, and I'm just going to kill you, right? And you can answer a few, but you're not going to be able to answer all of them. That's kind of the thing. Like, can your deck beat 3 removal spells on your big things? If it can't, then you probably want to add a few more big things or a few more ways to buy those big things back, fight on, for example, or more ways to find them, like we've been talking about this whole time. One of the things I think about when I'm drafting the green decks is I kind of just think I'm all colors to begin with. I mean, I'm not literally going to play all of the colors sometimes, but when I'm looking at my pack, like I've started with green cards, the pack is kind of colorless in a lot of ways, right? Where I'm not really limited that much by the colors of the cards. And another thing to think about is often when I start green, I take the green, blue, green, black, and black, green lands quite highly. Because, at least for me anyways, this might vary player to player, but at least for me, that's the most common base for a multicolor going over the top big green deck, something in the Sultai space. Especially because you get to employ all the self-mill and the card draw stuff we were just talking about with the last 2 tips. So yeah, a pretty straightforward point, but go bigger, both in the colors of how many colors you want to play in your green decks, but also mana cost-wise, more expensive things. I really don't mind playing, I'd say 6 or 7 cards that cost 5, 6, and 7 mana. I think that's totally fine. So basically, this is just permission to let your inner Timmy come out. It's kind of what I'm getting at here. My 4th tip here is keep an eye out for drafting green-white. So green-white is a deck I've actually faced a lot lately in Mythic. And it's a deck that if you look on 17 lands, the top player stats, so, people playing in high Mythic, they are very good, actually. Which is to say, there is a way to draft green-white where it is functional and a strong deck. The story so far with green-white in the format, if you talk to most people, I think, myself included, until up to a few days ago when I started kind of getting an inkling that this was a real deck, was that this is the worst deck in the format, or one of the worst decks in the format anyways. But I think the deck is pretty real. And it's got a few advantages to drafting it. So as drafts get harder, the weeks go on and drafts are just a little more cutthroat, you're going to find yourself in pods way more often where blue is very cut and the green multicolor stuff is not available. You're not seeing good top-end threats. You're not seeing the good fixers like Torgal and Fenrir. And, maybe you find yourself in a white deck, but white's not even all that open. And so I think when you're in these tough pods, green-white is a really good option. Because the second nice thing about drafting it is it does get to use a lot of cards that not a lot of people want, not a lot of people value highly. You get on the wheel quite often. So yeah, just to get into it, and to be clear, this is like green-white go wide, kind of the advertised archetype for what green-white is doing. So you've got the white base, of course, of the good white aggro cards. So Magitech Infantry and white Auracite, sometimes Galacat, but I find this is not a very artifact-heavy deck. So cards that care about artifacts, not as good here. Because one of the things that I think happens a lot is because you draft this deck when nothing else is very open and you're sort of in white, but it's not actually that open, white's not that open, you actually do end up playing a lot of green cards, I find. So that's kind of in contrast to what I was saying before about the white decks, where it's like you really want to be just as many white cards as you can find. I actually think this deck's a little bit different. I think it's a little bit more happy to be straight down the middle, half green cards and half white cards. So that means not as many artifacts, cards that care about artifacts. Those aren't going to work as well here. So really, you're just looking for the good core aggro white cards. So the white staff, Magitech Infantry is excellent here, of course, because that makes multiple bodies. You're Not Alone, which I think is just a great trick in the white decks I didn't call out before. The single white mana, +2/+2, and if you have 3 or more creatures, +4/+4 instead. Phenomenal. Great card. We also get the gold cards. Renoa Heartley is awesome. This is the 5 mana 4/4 that comes in with a 1/1 token, and then whenever Renoa attacks, another target attacking creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature you control. Like, this is a really good pull into this deck. We've got Garnet, Princesses Alexandria, which is the green-white 2/2 lifelink. Then when it attacks, you can remove lore counters from sagas. This doesn't come up all that often, but it is pretty good when you've got Chocomog, right? Summon Chocomog, which is a card you're going to play in this deck. Again, this is one of the cards that not many people want. This is the 3 mana 3/3 summon, where all 4 chapters say your creatures get +1/+0. Like, if you're able to curve Garnet into this card, like, that's pretty nice. And, if you're lucky, you have a Fenrir, maybe, where you can go Garnet into Fenrir. So, yeah, Garnet, I think, is a very powerful card if you were playing a low-power constructed format, and you could always have the Saga on turn 3. But I found that the way it's panned out, generally, is that you don't have the Saga on turn 3 very often, but in this deck, where you do want to play Summon Chocomog, that's a card that you're actually looking for, yeah, it actually lives up to its potential. It actually becomes a really good card. So you've got Renoa Heartley, which is generically good, doesn't need any work. You've got Garnet, which is just, a fine card on its own, 2/2 lifelink, and can be very, very good. And two other white cards that nobody really wants that you get to play are Aerith Rescue Mission, which is the 4 mana, make 3 1/1s. It also has the other mode of tap up to 3 creatures, put a stun counter on one of them. And Auron's Inspiration. This is the 2 and a white instant, attacking creatures get +2/+0 and has flashback for 2 white. So yeah, I think the core of the deck is pretty intuitive. It does make sense. And then there's the green cards. And like I said, I think you're pretty happy to play quite a hefty handful of green cards. So we've got Summon Fat Chocobo. Like, this card's just good, right? The 5 mana Saga creature that makes a 2/2 bird. This one's obvious. This one's just a good card. But I would even maybe argue maybe at its very best in this deck. We also get Kuina Coup Gourmet, which is 2 and a green for a 2/3. Whenever you make a token, you also make a 1/1 frog token, and then Kuina says you can pay 2 to sack a frog to put a +1/+1 counter on Kuina. This is another card nobody really wants except this green-white deck, and she's really good in this green-white deck. Another one that nobody wants but is very good here, Side Quest Raise a Chocobo. So this is the 2 mana enchantment that comes in, makes a Chocobo token, and then at the beginning of your main phase, if you control 4 or more birds, you flip it into another 2/2 token, basically, or it's not a token, but it's a 2/2 creature that when this flips, you get a land from your deck, put it on the battlefield tapped, and has the landfall ability, birds you control get +1/+0 until on turn. So not just this, all your birds get +1/+0. And yeah, this is a very, very good card in this deck. And so yeah, if you could enable this card with, Summon Fat Chocobo is really the main one. But also, Chocomog, right? Summon Chocomog. That is also a Chocobo. That's also a bird. So yeah, I think this card for sure is a green-white card. Side Quest Raise a Chocobo. We also get Rydia's Return, which is the overrun. The 3 green creatures you control get +3/+3. You can also choose to return 2 target permanents from your graveyard to your hand, but you're not going to do that all that often here. You also get to play Blitzball Shot, which is the 1 and a green instant. Target creature gets +3/+3 against trample until end of turn. This is a card we've seen in many formats in the past, and it's been really good there. It's been like one of Green's better commons. Not so much this time around, and if you look on 17 lands, it's not doing so well. But I think that's because the vast majority of the time when people play green, they're playing a rampy, multicolored green deck, where this kind of card just isn't what you want. It's just not the kind of card that plays well in those decks. But this deck is. Green-white is the exact kind of deck that wants this kind of card. And so yeah, this is just yet another card that nobody really wants. You have to take it very highly. You get it pretty late, and is very good in the deck. So yeah, I just really wanted to call this out as a deck that I know is not on a lot of people's radars. I've only gotten the chance to draft it once, and it was quite good. I was very happy about it. Like I said, I faced this a lot in Mythic, and I've lost to it more times than I've won against it, for sure, and even with good decks. So keep your eye out for this in pods that are a bit more difficult. I don't think you have to draft this deck necessarily if you're just in a pod where blue is open or you're getting excellent multicolor stuff. That's definitely the default decks that you're going to draft. But it's a really good deck to have in your tool belt as the format goes on. And for tip number 5, final tip, I'm cheating a bit here, but tip number 5 is a lightning round where I have just a few things I wanted to touch on. Just a few concepts and a few cards that I wanted to touch on, but I didn't think deserved their own place on the list. So we're just going to go through all those now. So first thing is when you have the card Cornered by Black Mages, the Sacrifice effect, you don't want to play it in decks with the cards Stuck in Summoner's Sanctum or Sleep Magic. These are the blue auras that tap your opponent's creatures and they stay tapped. Of course, the bad thing about this, the reason you don't want it, is because if you cast your Sleep Magic on their 2-drop and then you draw Cornered by Black Mages, well, they're just going to sack the card that you put the Sleep Magic on. So you really want to avoid having these kind of cards in the same deck. I could stomach 1-in-1. Like if you had a Sleep Magic and a Cornered by Black Mages, and you're a little bit short on playables, you're like, okay, my 23rd card isn't great anyways. Do I have to cut this Cornered by Black Mages? Or is it okay to just play the 1 copy? I think I can stomach it because the way it pans out is if you only draw one of them, like say you have 1 Sleep Magic, 1 Cornered. You only draw one of them in the game. Okay, fine. No worries. There's no interaction there. If you do draw both of them, if they're in your opening hand, you can go, okay, well, I just have to know I have to cast Cornered first, then I cast Sleep Magic after, so that's okay. Or, if you just happen to draw the Cornered by Black Mages first, then Sleep Magic is like the 15th card in your deck. That's fine. No harm, no foul. The only time it's really going to punish you is when you have drawn Sleep Magic early, and then Cornered is like your 15th card instead of Sleep Magic, or you kind of reverse the roles there. That's when it really sucks. But I think that's going to happen infrequently enough that I can stomach 1-in-1 if you really need to. Oh, also, just quick point on Sleep Magic, the single blue mana tap a thing, it doesn't untap. Great card. I think this card is phenomenal. Really, really good removal spell. I see it 7th, 8th pick, even in pods where blue does not seem all that open. So, I don't know, maybe people are low on this card. I'm not. I think it's great. Next up is just a broad thought about removal. Save your removal spells for the important stuff. This is a format where you should save your Doomblade for their Serra Angel. Yeah, basically, for the boomers out there. I really hesitate about using my removal spells on cards that I can just block. This changes a bit if your opening hand just has a lot of removal. You're fine firing off your removal spell on their 2-drop, on their 3-drop. But if you can deal with their 2s by blocking, right? Even if you don't have a 2-on-2, like you've got a 3-drop, a 2/3, the Shinra reinforcements on turn 3, they play a 2-drop, but you didn't have a 2-drop. I'm generally not going to spend my removal spell, my Fatal Push, let's just say it is, on their 2-drop. Because when they play their Ject or their Genova or whatever good 4-mana card they have, and this is assuming with this Fatal Push scenario that you can enable Revolt. But point still stands for any other removal spell. You're going to be like, crap, I really wish I saved that removal spell. And there's a lot of cards like that, especially on turn 4. There's a lot of cards that if you don't answer, like a lot of rares that is, you just kind of lose on the spot. And just going through a bunch of gameplay reviews with people this week in coaching, that's been a big point, just over and over, just like, oh, yeah, I wouldn't have cast that removal there. I would have just taken 2, played a blocker, save my removal spell for, whatever is lurking in their deck. This is especially true for when you're playing against like a green multicolor deck. They have like a 4-mana 4/4. Or, even something a little bit better, the 5-mana Chocobo Saga. But even then, even if I'm under a little bit of pressure, I really try to save my removal for their 6s, their 7s, the things that are really difficult to deal with in combat. So that just, big picture gameplay points. There are some formats where I go, yep, if they play a 2 and you don't have anything, you should just use a removal spell. If they play a 3, you don't have anything, you should just, use your removal spell. It's just too punishing to take recurring damage. I don't think this format is that. I would save my removal for their important things as much as I could. Next is the card Malboro. I just want to talk about this quickly. So this is the 6-mana 4/4 land cycler. Comes in, your opponent discards a card, loses 2 life, and exile the top 3 cards of your library. I have come around to just thinking this is the best land cycler. I actually have heard this in a few places too. A few other good players have said this. But I think this card is better than the 6-mana 6/6 in green. I mean, not like a ton better, but, better. I'm more likely to include this card in my black decks than the dinosaur in my green decks, I guess is the way I would put it. So, yeah, I'm just pretty happy playing 2 of these in most of my black decks. My silver black decks, my attrition-y black decks. And when I do that, I've done this on stream a few times, the question always comes up, do you want to cut a land, right, for your land cyclers? So at what point can you cut land for your land cyclers? And I honestly don't think land cyclers have much of an effect on that equation. Maybe a little bit if you have other factors going on that kind of make you want to play fewer lands, but I don't want to have to cycle my Malboro on turn 2, right? I would rather play something that affects the board, hit my land drop naturally on turn 3, and then, cast this on turn 6. Because basically the idea is with the cycling mode, with the land cycling, it's a buyout. It's something that you can do if you're just stuck with nothing to do in hand. If you can't hit your land drop, you never want to do it on turn 2. It's never an actively good thing to do on turn 2. I mean, I guess the exception to that is if you're planning to like reanimate it on a later turn or on a turn in the near future. Sure, that's an exception. But don't look at the cycling as a reason to cut lands. Again, lands are good. That's one of the other things, that big highlight of this episode. Lands are good. Do not skimp on lands. But yeah, I don't think that the cyclers really affect my land counts in very meaningful ways. Let's take a trip to Colorless Corner for 1 second. I have a few colorless cards here to talk about. So the first 2 are lands, the colorless towns in the set. Adventurer's Inn, which is the one that gains 2 life, and Eden's Seat of the Sanctum. This is the one that taps to add colorless. You can pay 5, tap, mill 2 cards. Then you may sack this land. When you do, return another target permanent from your graveyard to your hand. So I always talk about how colorless lands are a huge cost in Limited. You really don't want to be playing them. They really impact your mana base. I've actually been playing these in some decks. So the logic here, nothing's changed. They still do affect your mana base, right? But the logic here is that if you have enough spells in your mana base that help fix your mana, so Precious Wanderings, Fenrir, Torgal, those kind of cards, you can actually stomach a colorless land if it helps you in other ways. So if you really care about the town, if you have Town Synergies or Omega, the blue-green 8/8 that cares about non-basics, I have played these cards there. With Adventurers in, 2 life's not nothing, right? If you had a basic land that came in and gained you 2 life, that'd be a great card. The fact that this makes colorless mana and not colored is a big drawback, you know, can't overlook that. But I found in those spots where I want towns and I've got enough fixing in my land base, and maybe I've got a lot of dual lands as well, I'm fine playing Adventurer's Land. I think it's actually good to in some spots. Same thing with Eden Seat of the Sanctum. You know, everything I just said about Adventurers in goes for Eden. But more so, I'm more incentivized to play this card if I care about milling. If I have some really good stuff to get back. If I have a bunch of Shinra reinforcements and town greeters and I can fill my yard. Also, a note about this card, you can just mill and not sacrifice it, right? You can just spend a few turns, the board stall out, milling, finding your best cards. When you activate it, you don't actually have to sacrifice the land. And that's something that's a little bit easy to miss. So yeah, I don't think that you should be playing these cards very often. I think you have to have multiple reasons. You have to have the right decks. But I also wanted to point them out as not zeros, right? Not cards you should never play. Another card that I've put in quite a few decks, actually, is Ring of Lucy. So this is the 4-mana legendary artifact. Taps to add 2 colorless, and you can pay 2, tap it, pay a life, tap target non-land permanent. So this is a card for the green decks generally. Sometimes if you're very card draw heavy in your blue decks, I like it there too, because, you know, card draw, mana production, that's just the natural synergy there. And mostly, though, I like it in decks with multiple 6s and 7s, you know, like the decks I was talking about before, where you don't mind running 5 or 6 cards that are that expensive. This is another card that, to want to play, you need to have both the right top-end cards and the right cheap cards, which is to say you need enough top-end cards to say, hey, when I untap with this card, I'm actually going to use the mana. And that could be card draw as well, where you could have like 4 or 5 card draw spells and feel good about the additional mana. And you also need to have good early game, where you're affecting the board, where you're not dying. Because if you're under any pressure at all, and this is your turn 4 play, that's not good, right? So it's niche in that way, but I think it's powerful and pretty good in those decks that can fulfill both those requirements. And then final card I want to talk about is a rare here, Balam Garden, Seed Academy. This is the blue-green tapped land that transforms into a 5/4 flying vehicle with crew 1. Then whenever it attacks, you draw a card. And its activation cost to flip it is 7 mana, tap it, transform this land, but this costs 1 less to activate for each other town you control. I think this card is great, and I think underrated given how often I get this card passed to me. Like, I'll see this card pick 4, pick 5 quite often, like in pack 1. I think this is a reason to beat towns. And the really nice thing about this card, and something you can't say about a lot of rares, is there are multiple cards in the set that search this card out. And so, you know, anytime you can see one of the best cards in your deck, which I think this Garden will be a lot of the time, more often, because you have ways to search it, that's great. So specifically, I'm talking about Precious Wanderings, which is the 3-mana ramp spell that searches for a basic land or a town, which obviously is a big part here, and, you know, puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. There's also World Map. That's the 1-mana artifact that you can sack for a mana to go get a basic, but you can also pay 3 to sack it to go get any land. So, you know, another thing that searches it. And I have played World Map when I have this card. I generally will play a copy of World Map when I've got the Garden. Also, if you have Town Greeters, the 2-mana 1/1 that mills for and picks up a land, like, it just helps you find this card a little bit more often. So yeah, I just want to call it out as both a good card, a card that I think people might be a little bit underrating, but also a card that has some advantages over other rares, because you actually get to see it in most of your games if you're picking up the Greeters, the Wanderings, and the World Maps. Anyways, thank you for hanging out today on this episode. Hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed. As always, if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to give the video a like, comment, and subscribe. Check out that Patreon if you made it this far. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. And happy birthday to Dawn once again. Happy birthday, Dawn.